Oh, what a beautiful Nope, nope, we're not going to try that. I was going to sing. It didn't quite work. Beautiful day. Welcome to After Service, a production of Open Door Community Church. And who's that? Who's that over there?
Oh, it's me, Pastor Brian, and that's Kermit the Frog over there.
Hi, Kermit the Frog here.
Yep, I can still do that.
Yeah, because you got a frog in your throat. Yeah.
All
So
right.
I'm sorry you don't feel good today, but you're still cheerful. How are you managed to be cheerful and sick at the same time? You're amazing.
You remember I worked on cruise ships, right? So part of my job there was when the time when the moment was upon us that you could put on the performance. I would put on these Copacabana flowery things and dance for 3 hours and be stupid in front of people, and then I go back to my room and go, So that's not to say I'm not don't enjoy being here. I'm just saying that, there's
You can ignore.
Yeah, I can do that. So what are you up to today? It's a beautiful day outside.
It's a beautiful day. I've been doing yard work, and we're gonna have a grill and chill at my house in a couple of weeks. So I'm just doing various things, putting up a shade on the patio, working on a walkway over here. Yeah, just other than the normal work for church and stuff like that. But that's kind of the non-boring stuff. So
Isn't it nice to have, I guess, an excuse or an impetus for taking care of those little projects? Like, people are going to come over, and I just want this done for that.
Right, yeah. So I have a small to-do list that I would, it just gives you a little bit more oomph to get it done sooner than later. That's right. Yeah. So yeah, just doing stuff around here, and it's really bad. And you, besides being sick, have done anything particular this week?
No. Took the day off on Tuesday, which I don't do. Like, I don't usually take sick days. I don't get paid for them. So actually, I do.
You don't pay your.
There's no sick days, but I get paid no matter what, so it doesn't really matter. But then just yesterday, I kind of stepped back into work. Today has been a regular work day. So it's not too bad. Last night was Sam's final youth lacrosse game ever, and that was kind of one of those poignant, bittersweet moments where you're like, oh, okay, he is. Whether or not he plays lacrosse again, he certainly won't be playing in the youth lacrosse program that I'm a part of. And it's, there's some boys that I've been coaching since third grade, and I gave them hugs and said, hey, I just thank you for the privilege to coach you and the trust that you've put in me to allow me to serve in this role. And it was pretty special because I remember, these are kids from third grade, and I looked at pictures and I'm like, holy cow, they were so little,
Yeah, and I felt a little bit that way when Dawson finished his 8th grade basketball too. Similar thing, and it always makes me sad that they don't continue some of those programs through high school, so the kids who maybe aren't as talented or competitive can still play because they still enjoy it. It's not that they stopped enjoying it. It's just becomes not the thing anymore.
Yeah. No, I remember in high school, I wasn't good enough to play basketball in high school. In fact, I wasn't good enough to play basketball in middle school. You know, it immediately went from primary school, it got competitive. In junior high, you had to try out if you didn't make it, you know, so you just played with your buddies, but you still loved it. And then there was like a high school program, no, I mean a program, a youth league that was just for fun. I mean, you played hard and stuff, but it was just fun, you know, and the people who wanted to be intense and stuff went over to their own program. And that's really what I enjoy. And actually, that's kind of what Sam enjoys too. He loves the idea of playing and getting better, but he doesn't really enjoy the intensity of the competition.
Yeah.
He just kind of like, it's not fun. So anyway.
Yeah. Competition can be, and parents can be ridiculous, but we've talked about that before.
Yeah. Yeah. So we should probably, now that we're 6 minutes in, we should talk about the sermon from this past week and dive into the kind of the meat of the conversation.
Yeah. Oh, I should a little bit of a summary. There's a lot I said. Imagine I tried to say that in one sermon. These last two, and really the one I'm about to do. There's too much. I don't know. It was. So Paul is making the argument that the cross is what solves all these lots of issues, particularly hostility, and brings peace. And he says it does it by abolishing the law. And what does that mean? How does that bring peace, and how does the cross abolish the law? Was basically my two big questions. And so I said, one of the things I said, you got to pull in information from other places to help you kind of get his argument. I mean, you could just simply take it as at face value that, okay, yeah, it's ended, okay, and move on, which is fine. And that's kind of where I'm going to end up going, because I probably went a little too deep this last sermon. But nevertheless, that's what I asked, is how does it end it? And so, yeah, those kind of the questions. And I don't know how much of those details you want me to provide, but there's a lot.
I think one of the first things that stood out to me, and you've just kind of glossed over it a little bit this afternoon, but you wanted to make sure, when you talked about the fact that the cross in many ways negates the law, right? That people were going to get upset about that.
I did say that, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to acknowledge, because there are people who are non-Christians who hang arguments against Christians upon Old Testament law, right? They point back to things there and say, well, that doesn't make any sense, right? And there's also people who are Christians who use Old Testament law as a hammer when they're pointing out, people, right? And so to say something like the cross trumps all that stuff has the opportunity, and I think you even said that, to offend everybody in some way. Yeah, and I really appreciate that, because I think it really reinforces that Christ turned everything up on its head and still fulfilled the prophecies. It's like, I mean, the creativity of God is astounding. Like, I'm going to do it, and you don't know how I'm going to do it, and you're all going to be wrong.
Yeah. And yeah, it does. I mean, it really does upset people. It upsets some Christians, because it's like, well, but are you trying to say that we can just ignore whatever the commands are in the Old Testament, which is not what I'm saying, and that's not what Paul is saying. They're still there. It's just how people are meant to relate to the Old Testament law, as we talked about last fall, is a big deal and confusing for most Christians. And so, yeah, he fulfills it. He fulfills it in a couple of different ways. He fulfills it in the sense that he fully obeyed it. So we're perfectly righteousness in him according to the law. but he also fulfilled it in the sense of, well, the law says you broke that command, so you need to be punished. And Jesus said, okay, I'll fulfill that piece of the law too by punishing, getting the punishment for your sin, Brian. I will take that punishment instead. So in both cases, the law is fulfilled, and now in Jesus, there's a different way to be right with God, to have access to God that has nothing to do with keeping those laws for us, because Jesus already did. I know that's so confusing, but
well, yeah. I mean, I suppose it is. I go back to something that you and I have talked about. I'm not sure if we've ever really spoken about it on the podcast specifically, but during our coffee conversations, that maybe the most appropriate way to view the law in the Old Testament is through the prism of Christ. That, you know, if you're trying to understand what applies or what doesn't apply, then you have to apply Christ to that. At least that's how I interpret it. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's the same God of the Old Testament and the New Testament. His standards of what is right and wrong has not changed. But you need to look at the Old Testament as case law, as this is specific applications at that time. And so, you know, because that's what a case law is. Here's a specific case, and how did the principles of the law apply in that case? Well, this is the answer. And so what we need to do is reverse engineer that and go, okay, so what's the principle behind thou shalt not covet? Well, Christ says, okay, well, the issue with like, say, adultery is not just did you physically do something, it's the idea, are you longing and wanting for a sexual relationship with someone who's not your wife? That's the principle behind that law. So there's the actual standard. And so you can do that with all the Old Testament. What's the principle behind it? But the only way you can do that is because you have to look at through the principle, the prism of Christ, and how he changed all of that. Those laws aren't your laws. You're under the law of Christ, which is to love one another and to love God. Well, then how do you do that? Well, you look at places like the Old Testament for examples of how the same principles were applied then, and then you can apply them to today. So.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. At least it makes sense to me. I'm not sure how
right.
people receive it.
With the phrase, the law doesn't apply to you. Wait a minute, we don't have to keep the 10 Commandments? Well, in one sense, no, because they're not written to you. In another sense, well, yeah, because, well, the standard for how we should live that those 10 Commandments are based on, well, they're still our standard. So people just get hung up on semantics, which never, ever happens in any other field, does it?
No, not at all. It's...
Thank you for catching.
What's that?
Thanks for catching the sarcasm.
Oh yeah, no, I'm here for you. I grew up. That was a love language in our house growing up. Yeah. Well, now I lost a little bit of my train of thought. You know, because there appears to be that catch-22. Now I'm back on it. The idea that you can't live without sin, but your sin is washed away with Christ. That doesn't mean that you should sin, you know, wantonly. It means that you're even though you're forgiven, you're still trying not to do that. And it's like, okay, so the law doesn't necessarily specifically apply, and yet you are, you know, there's an expectation, I suppose, that living in Christ means that you're going to be following those laws anyway to the best of your ability, to a certain extent. I mean, I don't know about the seafood thing, but
hard to put it in words, isn't it?
It is, which is why I'm not a pastor.
Yeah, you're under the law of Christ, is the way Paul puts it in Romans. You're under the law of Christ. You're under the law of the Spirit of life. That we're trying to stay, or as he puts it in Galatians, you know, keep step with the Spirit of God, right? Those kinds of is the language he uses. That we're dead, and so we've been paid. We died with Christ, so sin is washed away, but we've been resurrected with Christ too, and so now we're a new being. So that new being is being molded to live like Jesus. So be who you are is kind of what he's getting at, which is to follow Christ. So, but okay, I have a direction to go. If you don't have a direction to go,
go for it.
Yeah, one of the things that, again, it is so easy to and nothing wrong with that, is to consider all of this discussion in terms of personal individualism, our salvation. But that's not the context of this piece of Ephesians. It's considering that in terms of global, different tribes of people being reconciled to God, and just how does that whole group dynamics work. And it's not, he puts it in terms of Jews versus Gentiles, but the application applies to all the different ways that you can break up people groups, whether it's rich or poor or skin color or orientation, or, I mean, you just name it, political organizations. And that's the piece where it's like, well, where's, and this is what I'm getting at a little bit, where on Sunday, how does that solve the conflict? But one piece that I realized last week is one of the things it does is it resolves the justice issue, in that there is legitimate argument to be made that there are people who've been wronged, and that they have a case that they've been denied justice. Absolutely. And this is, it seems to me, be saying that one of the things we can say is the punishment for that injustice is either going to be judged by Christ or by punishment taken by Jesus. So justice will be served through Jesus one way or the other. And that was the part that I went, well, that's a different way of thinking about it, just for me personally.
Yeah, that's a hang up I have, if I'm going to be transparent on that, is that I was a kid who grew up, and fairness, following the rules, was very important to me. And I know as an adult, that's something, in fact, I dealt with it last night. Coaching lacrosse, where that kind of eye for an eye thing just came up. One of our kids was hurt because of a cheap shot, and I know that retaliation is not the right way. And generally, I'm like, guys, chill out. But it was something that it was one of the coach. It was a coach's kid, and the boys on the sideline on the other team were cheering on the fact that one of our guys got hurt. And it's really hard not to want to take justice into your own hands and go, hey, send in a player and say, take that guy out or whatever. I mean, that.
Very understandable.
Yeah. But then you're going, really? Okay, well, Christ has got this covered. I mean, it's, and that's a minor thing. I want to be clear. I'm not equating
but the principle applies to much bigger, much more serious things. Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it.
In many ways, we could take this back to a year ago or however long ago when we were talking about forgiveness and, forgiving. And what was the other part of that where we were going back and forth? Trust, right. It's just like the idea that you can hand over justice to Christ. There's something comforting about that, and there's still a process you have to go through to really accept what that means and your relationship to that person or that circumstance. It's not like, okay, Jesus, you got this. I don't want to minimize or marginalize the effort that it takes to hand over justice to Christ, because that is remarkable trust in Him, and that's
or minimize fact that something has happened. That it's not meant to say that there aren't real wrongs that have been done to people. Of course there have, and continue to be. Oh yeah, of course. And that's the thing, is the cross this whole thing doesn't minimize or say that that's not there. In fact, it says the opposite. It's very much there.
Yeah, it has to.
your point of trust. Go ahead.
No, well, it has to exist in order for Jesus to cover it, right?
Hmm.
It's so if anybody is thinking like, well, Jesus got it covered, it's not a big deal. It's like, no, it is a big deal, because if you say it's not a big deal, then you're basically saying it's that you're diminishing the power of Jesus' sacrifice, right?
Right.
I mean, it is a big deal, and
Right.
he still is covering that.
Right.
I think that's something. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's something that we really struggle with, And I'll bring my own analogy along with this. If you've ever been like in school with somebody, or been friends with somebody who's like a high performer, gets great grades, they always show up on time, and then
Right.
they do something fantastic, there's kind of a sense of, well, of course they did, because they always do. And it's like, yeah, but we can't diminish the effort that went into them continuing to do that over and over again. It makes it sound
Right.
like, oh, it's no big deal because they always do great things. You're just like, wait, yeah, that's true. And it doesn't take away, it should not take away from
No.
how,
Right.
what that is. And it's with Christ, with the idea of, I mean, if you think about the horrible injustices that we see in our country today, in the world today,
Yeah.
to say, well, Jesus has got that covered, and that's a really, really big deal.
Right. And I don't think we appreciate that as much as Christians should. I think you're right on that we don't see how big of a deal that is. Even as Christians, we don't see how big of a deal that is, because we don't see how sometimes we don't see how terrible it is that those sins are on kind of a like I said, a cultural level, on a civilization level. And then your point of, well, of course Jesus, because it gets so commonplace to
Right.
think of forgiveness and the fact that he brings justice. Yeah.
Well, and
Wow.
I think we can be dismissive of people's problems at the same time,
Uh-huh.
right?
Absolutely.
It's like, oh, Jesus has got that covered. Just let it go. It's. I don't think that does anybody any good. I mean, again, I think it diminishes Christ and then diminishes this person's
No.
problem. It's not useful.
No, and it's again for me, the context back to, well, then is this question over? So how is Paul trying to communicate that the cross, the abolishment of the law, how is that actually dealing with tribal, to use a more generic word, conflicts? And it's like, I just can't get past it. I'm still going to be talking about the same issue on Sunday, because it's just shocking me and blowing my mind that it's, and it just, the justice. And sometimes I think, so I'm rambling a little bit. Sometimes I think part of the problem and why because there is so much anger right now is because people don't see that there is a possibility of real justice happening, because all we got is people.
Mm-hmm.
You're removing a practical, real perspective that there's a God above everything who's going to set it right, who you can appeal to. All you got to appeal to is things like politics and protesting and anger, government, whether right or left, it's all the same. And it's like, I get you're frustrated with stuff, but come on, we can do better than this, because there is justice that's going to happen.
Yeah,
So,
it really is the lack of trust that says, I need to do this. I need to do this myself, instead of trusting that Jesus has it handled. I think, boy, yeah, on all sides of the spectrum, we're struggling with that, and thinking. I mean, these are such universal issues. The idea that
they really are.
I need to do this because who else is going to do it?
Right.
And there's a lot of fear in our culture that says you have to do this, because if you don't, look at all the terrible things that are going to happen. It's like it's like somehow it's you as an individual and your actions that are going to bring Christ. And I think we have. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. Right. No. Again, just to be clear, it doesn't mean that we need to not do justly. Right? Of course, we need to be as just people as possible. We need to be caring and kind and everything else. Yes, but that's not the point in this case. It's what's going to fully deal with this entire systemic problem of the human race, and that's what we're discussing. And I heard a thing from and I'm going to bring it back up on Sunday. I don't know if you've ever heard Peter Singer. He's an Australian philosophical moralist, so not a Christian perspective, just by the title. But in 1972, he wrote a paper that no one's really been able to argue against, and his conclusion was this: that the ordinary person is evil. Which we go, what? But here's the basic argument, and I can summarize it down to just a couple of words. It's that if you don't do what you can do to solve a bad problem, then that in itself is evil.
So kind of apathy or inaction is evil.
Show example. You want, and here, and this is his illustration, is if you're walking past a lake and you see a child drowning in the pond, and if you don't try and save that child, well, that's an evil act.
Yeah.
Which, right. And he continues with it is, and even if you for example lose your iPhone, you ruin your iPhone to do that, that's still okay, because you know that the child is more valuable than your iPhone. So not denying yourself some luxuries of like not getting wet or whatever it is, those are not good reasons for it. Makes sense. And so then he applies it on the world stage. Is like, there's no reason for there to be famine anywhere in the world. There's plenty of food, plenty of money. Why haven't we done this as a human race? And the reality, and is the inescapable conclusion is we as a human race as a whole, not talking about individuals, we don't want to do it. And so as a human race, we are chosen to do the morally evil thing of not making sure people all over the world don't die of preventable diseases, don't have plenty of food, all of that. It's like, it's like that. And why did I say all this? Is because we so easily want to say other people are bad and not realize that there's a bad in us too. And that's one of the points in this whole passage that is like, okay, all you people are saying that they've been treated unjustly. You have, but so is everybody else. And so you've done unjust things too. We're all guilty. So let's stop pointing fingers and start acting justly and trying to extend mercy, because otherwise all it's going to do is just create more pain.
That's really convicting. It really is. And I think it should be, it personally convicting. And I hope that there are definitely things in my life where I know my heart needs to change, that I think that, it can't change. I can't change things as an individual, but as like, if it's like the idea of adoption, right? There are so many children waiting to be adopted, but there doesn't need to be, right?
No, there shouldn't be. None. There's plenty of people who could parent those children.
Yeah.
But they don't.
Yeah. It's
and all those years ago that we did. And that recognition, it still haunts me, is like, you mean there's plenty of food in the world for everybody? There really is? Why are we not feeding everybody? Wow. That's just crazy.
I think not just crazy, it's gross.
Yeah.
It's disgusting. And it's a thing that we can get distracted. We get distracted by little things, and we want to call them out as atrocities. But here's atrocities. People are starving to death.
Regular people on a daily basis. How many more lattes do you need? I mean, just that, not that I'm sponsoring them or anything, but that Compassion International, where you can sponsor a child for like, $1 a day. It's like, how much money a month do you put on lattes? Just don't have a latte a day. There you go. Now, I'm saying that. Do I sponsor a child? Nope.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're choosing the cell phone in our pocket over rescuing the child in the lake. That's what we're doing as a human race.
Over and over again. And that's what's convicting to me is, I'm definitely aware of choices that I'm making that are completely selfish, self-serving, for my comfort, for my privilege, and it feels gross.
And then we get lulled back to sleep and like, yeah, but everybody else is doing it, so it's okay.
Yep. Oh boy. Yeah. On that happy note, yeah.
Yep. And so there's plenty of blame to go around for all the evils in the world. Jesus is going to judge every last one of those issues. Thank God he made another way, a different way.
Amen. Yeah. Amen to that.
Yeah. So anyways, deep stuff. I don't know. Appreciate having a conversation with you. All of this is convicting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing the fruits of your labor on Sunday as we kind of dig in a bit more, and hopefully the people who heard today's podcast will come into that with a table set a bit for them.
Yeah. One last one on this topic. So, all right, you guys have a great time. Thanks for joining us today, and whatever day it is. But thanks for joining me, Joe. This is great as always, and looking forward to seeing you on Sunday. Hopefully, you're feeling better.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to people singing real loud so I don't have to.
There you go.
All right.
All right.
Take care.
Take care.